The year is no longer 2014, and the dystopian society tropes in TV and media just don't hit anymore. I'm sorry. Hey guys, what's up? It's Imurgency and welcome back to my channel. And today we're talking about media tropes. Now, it's been a minute since we talked about tropes on this channel. The last trope analysis I did was actually back in February, talking about how the friends to lovers trope kind of ruined Gen Z dating. But today we're talking about the trope of the dystopian society. Think Hunger Games, Divergent, and other forms of media that fit into that realm, and why now in the current day of 2023, and maybe 2024, depending on when you're watching this video, as to why this trope just doesn't hit the same anymore. Now, before I get jumped, because I know how y'all like to tussle when it comes to a good dystopian storyline, I'm not saying that the dystopian society trope or storyline is not doing well right now and is unsuccessful, because I mean, you just have to look at the top 10 on Netflix right now, as well as the box office performance of the new Hunger Games movie, to see that that's just not the case. My argument is that the appeal behind these dystopian storylines just isn't the same as it used to be back in the 2010s, because the world that we live in today is just not the same as the world as it was in the early 2010s. So in this video, we're gonna break down the history of dystopian media and the concept of a dystopian society in television and entertainment, why it was popular and why it sort of fizzled out, and then really getting into what that shift was, moving into modern day and really answering why dystopian storylines just don't hit anymore. But if you're new around here and like all things TV, pop culture, commentary, and fashion, then I highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of the content that I have coming out on this channel. 2024 is going to be a huge year on this channel. We're going to be seeing a lot of changes, all things that you should definitely be excited about, so stay tuned. But make sure you subscribe and leave a like on this video so that you don't miss out on any of it as it comes out. Also, while you're at it, if you enjoy a more fashion and lifestyle sort of bag, or just enjoy raw show reactions, then you should follow me on my other social medias at Imurgency on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, where I do all those things. But let's get into the brief history of dystopian media. First and foremost, I feel like it's important to define what we're talking about when we say the word dystopian, because I feel like that word is thrown around a whole bunch, and it's important that we understand where we're coming from. The word dystopian is defined as relating to or denoting an imagined state or society where there is great suffering or injustice. Typically, your stereotypical dystopian society in TV and film is made to be this futuristic worst case scenario society, which oftentimes tends to be a criticism or a commentary on the society that we currently live in real life, and showing the parallels between these two worlds, showing how bad things can get as a form of cautionary tale, or just a creative thought experiment for the writers and producers of said shows and movies about dystopian societies. And some of the first documented forms of dystopian media can be traced back all the way into the late 1700s in the form of dystopian literature in reaction to the French Revolution of 1789. And if you've gone through the American public school system, dystopian literature is not something that should be new to you, with some of the classic examples of dystopian literature being George Orwell's Animal Farm, Lord of the Flies, Fahrenheit 451, and of course, more recently, the Hunger Games series. And while these examples of dystopian literature that I brought up more so focus on the social commentary and critique side of the dystopianism, what we all witnessed happen in the 2010s with the rise of dystopian and post-apocalyptic entertainment in the forms of TV shows and movies was a little bit different. Because during this era, these types of movies and TV shows really blew up and were extremely popular in the mainstream. Like, you really could not escape these movies and TV shows during this era. They were everywhere. Like, this form of media really did raise a lot of Gen Z. And while we joke about it online, it definitely did contribute to a lot of the values and belief systems for a lot of Gen Z in terms of having a strong social and political compass and wanting to fight for what's right, being more inclined to advocate for things politically and socially. But I guess the big question is, why were dystopian storylines so popular during this era? When you look back on the 2010s, I feel like now it's easy to sort of think like, oh wow, things were so easy back then. But I feel like globally, this era was really the rise of social justice and social consciousness, in the sense of being concerned with things like climate change. This is the era that sparked the beginning of social justice movements in the 21st century. And again, I'm going to clarify, because I feel like people are going to say like, Gen Z wasn't the first people to have social justice movements. I said 21st century, post 2000s. With the initial rise of things like Black Lives Matter, the Arab Spring, and many other different social movements going on at the time. This was an era where we had, for one of the first times, a global heightened social awareness of the injustices and imperfections of the world. Because you have to remember, this was also during a time of early social media. So there really hadn't been a time prior to this where globalization of information had been that easily accessible and present during that time. Because prior to this era, you're seeing things through your TV or newspaper, but the 2010s really evolved social media, so a lot of people were getting information and unfiltered information through their phones for one of the first times ever. This one article makes sense of the dystopian boom in the 2010s as having the films allow us to reflect on the harsh realities of our present moment, on conditions that are difficult to confront head-on, using the future and post-apocalyptic nature of these storylines to be a window on and a critique of the present. And you can see this because pretty much all of the movies and TV shows that were set in these dystopian societies were all essentially that. Social commentaries and allegories on the political state of the world that were made into something that can be a little bit more digestible. Like Hunger Games and Divergent, tackling classism and social inequalities, among many other, as well as political corruption. Shows like The Walking Dead, putting a microscope on the nature of human behavior, or more so human nature. And even more recently, you have shows like Handmaid's Tale, a show that's plot revolves around having a second civil war, where women are subjugated and their autonomy is stripped away from them. To shows even more recently like Black Mirror and Squid Game, which explore the intersection between modernizing technology and the darkest sides of humanity. And while all these shows that revolve around dystopian or dystopian adjacent storylines are hits in and of themselves and are honestly iconic in the entertainment zeitgeist, I feel like there's recently been a shift in the sentiment and popularity of these sorts of media. Taking Black Mirror as an example, with each season becoming less and less popular and less shocking, you're kind of led to wonder why that's the case. And while production issues and writing are part to blame, I'd argue that a partial reason behind this is that as the seasons kept going and as time keeps progressing, the sort of fantasy dystopia that we grew to love in shows like Black Mirror become less and less foreign and less shocking because of the world that we live in today. We've had many events in the last 5 years alone that could qualify for their own Black Mirror episode. And that tracks with a lot of other dystopian media. The world that we live in today is quite dystopian if you think about it, and especially if you compare it to how the world worked during the dystopian boom in the 2010s. Technology is integrated into our daily lives now in ways that we couldn't have imagined back then, or actually in ways that we kind of did imagine back then and kind of modeled after. The climate crisis is worse than it was then. Between all the war, strife, inequality, and human rights violations that are very publicly accessible and in our face on a day-to-day basis, I'd say, yeah, the world that we live in today is quite dystopian, or at least dystopian adjacent. And while I'm not going to go too far because I do still want to stay monetized on this video, the world is a very dark place, and I feel like now we're all very hyper aware of how dark the world can be. Like for the past 4 to 5 years, we've all been living through a worldwide pandemic. Like our worldview has just been shifted. And this isn't me just trying to be all doom and gloom. I'm just trying to explain that based on all this and after all this, it makes sense why the general public has gone through a form of tragedy fatigue. Like we've all collectively gone through so much and have seen so much that it makes sense that interest in entertainment has changed along with that. During the height of the pandemic, we saw a exponential rise in people turning to escapist media, things that will distract them from the hardships and horrors that were going on in the real world, and just weren't as heavy as things are in real life, which is why we saw everyone get on TikTok during 2020. Everyone was playing Animal Crossing, and shows that were coming out during that era were so adamant on not mentioning or even addressing the collective experience that everyone had been going through. It was very much peak escapism, no ray. And while that stage of the world is no longer our reality, a lot of those themes have transferred over and evolved along with us. And we can see it today. A lot of our media now and a lot of the stuff that we consume is still very much escapist. We've seen a rise of interest in reality shows. We've seen an astronomical increase in reboots of comfort and nostalgic feel-good shows. And I'm not going to pretend like the reason behind why we're seeing so many reboots is solely because of the escapism of it all, but I feel like it kind of contributes. Even in the music that's popular right now. I saw this one really great TikTok a while ago talking about how you can gauge the state of the world by the type of pop music that's being released. As over the past couple of years, we've said goodbye to a lot of the grungy, raw and gritty sort of pop music that was really popular during like 2016 through 19, in favor of things that are a lot lighter, in favor of music that's more upbeat, dancey, and just more fun, feel good as opposed to real raw and serious. Like think Thank You Next. It's very similar to the dance and party pop boom that we saw post 2001. And this is all to say that escapist media is kind of in right now, which can help explain in part why we've been seeing dystopian storylines not hit in the same way that they used to. Like the world is just too dark right now. Like it doesn't feel like something that's like a cautionary tale or a warning or allegory of the future like it was back in the 2010s. Now for a lot of people, I feel like it's a little bit too close to home. And that same feeling of wonder and distance from the things that are happening on screen, like just is not the same. Like speaking from personal experience, I went to go see the recent Hunger Games movie, and I love me some Hunger Games. Like during Hunger Games peak, like I was in the trenches. Like I was down. Like, watching it now, I still love the movie, but I couldn't sit down and watch it without thinking about how similar the storylines and what was happening in the movie are to things that are happening in the world right now. And like I said, while I still enjoyed the movie, the feeling that I had walking out of it was not the same as the feeling that I had walking out of the Hunger Games movie back in 2014, or watching any of the other post-apocalyptic or dystopian TV shows, movies, or books. And that's really what I'm getting at in the crux of the video. A lot of dystopian media doesn't hit the same way anymore because it hits too close to home. And that's not to say that these storylines are bad by any means, it's just that the experience consuming them is just very different. But now I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on dystopian storylines and tropes? Are you able to consume and enjoy this media the same way as you have in the past? Did lockdown turn you off from zombie movies in the same way that it did for me? I want to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below and have a little healthy discussion. But thanks so much for watching. Again, if you're new, then definitely subscribe, leave a like, and follow me on my socials at Imurgency. But other than that, y'all, I will see you in the next video. Peace.